Hello and welcome. My name is Joe Caramelli and I oversee Grand Rounds for the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. And thank you for joining today's presentation. This is the final Grand Rounds presentation for this academic year for the 2021-22 Grand Rounds series. And there's a core group of us that work on Grand Rounds each week, including Samhara Braha and Mike Walker. We record and archive all the presentations which are on the department website. You can look at past presentations and after next week, today's presentation as well. I want to acknowledge two funding sources for the Grand Round series, the Ripley Fund and the Garvey Institute for Brain Health Solutions. Close to the end of the presentation, I'll put a link in the chat that has a 5-question Grand Rounds presentation evaluation. If you get a moment, please go through that and complete the evaluation. That's helpful for me for planning Grand Rounds. You're also welcome to send me any overall feedback or comments, suggestions for topics or potential speakers in Grand Rounds. So with that, I'll stop there for now and turn it over to Dr. Unitzer to introduce today's speakers.
Well, thank you, Joe, and thank you for doing a great job this year with a whole nother year of really fabulous virtual Grand Rounds presentations. Thanks to you, thanks to Mike and to Samhar, and thanks to everybody who has joined us and listened to some of our Grand Rounds. And now it's a real honor and pleasure for me to introduce today's Grand Rounds speakers. Today's Grand Rounds focuses on a really important topic: interventions to help pregnant and parenting women with at-risk substance abuse. And I'll just share a little bit of a story. So many years ago, in the mid-1980s, I was asked by Gro Brundtland, who was a former Norwegian prime minister and a family physician, and was at the time the director of the World Health Organization in Geneva. And we didn't have at the WHO mental health anything at that time. And Gro argued with me a little bit about why we should have mental health. And she said, if I only had $1 to give you to spend on mental health, what would you do with that? And I said to her, I would use it to help a pregnant woman who is struggling with depression or substance use. And she looked at me kind of weird and she said, what do you mean? You wouldn't use it for schizophrenia or for something like that? And one thing she did tell me is she had had a son who had bipolar disorder who had committed suicide. It was a very tragic story. So she was looking for something like that. And I said, no, I want to go as far upstream as I possibly can, because I might help that woman, I might help that woman's family, and I might prevent mental illness and addiction in the future. And I still feel like that's the answer I would give 30 years later. And I think some of what we're going to hear today really has done that. The Pcap program that you'll hear about has really taken that challenge on and done that in a really beautiful way. So today's Grand Round speaker is Dr. Therese Grant. Therese trained as an epidemiologist, and she worked closely in our department with Dr. Ann Streisguth, who is a retired faculty member who was a real expert in fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. And today, Therese holds the Ann Streisguth Endowed Professorship for Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorders. About 3 decades ago, she and colleagues developed the Washington Parent-Child Assistance Program. That's a statewide program that you're going to hear more about for pregnant and parenting women with at-risk substance use. And Therese directed this program for about 25 years, and she's going to tell us about it today. She has been a truly wonderful faculty member, a colleague, a scholar, a wonderful teacher in our department, and she's getting ready to retire from the department this year. So on behalf of the department and really our entire UW academic community, I want to thank her and wish her all the best. And Therese is going to be joined in her comments today by one of our newer faculty members, Dr. Susan Stoner. Dr. Stoner is a clinical psychologist. She's a research associate professor in our department, and she's recently taken over this really important work as the director of the Washington State Pcap program. And Susan's research focuses on understanding and addressing cognitive, behavioral, and developmental impacts of substance use on individuals and families, particularly those who are pregnant and postpartum. So with that, I want to just thank both of you, welcome both of you, and please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Drs. Grant and Stoner.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. I will get started. Thank you for that kind introduction, Jürgen. I really appreciate it. I'm Therese Grant, and I'm delighted to be here with you today and really honored to be invited to give this presentation. So thank you, Jürgen, very much. I'd like to start with a little background. Jürgen introduced Anne Streisgott. So Anne was a faculty member in the psychiatry department for decades, and she was a beloved colleague and mentor of mine for decades as well. Anne was part of the University of Washington team that first identified and named fetal alcohol syndrome in 1973. And in the years following, she worked with hundreds of families and individuals who were affected by prenatal alcohol exposure, and she studied many aspects of this birth defect. In the 1980s, during the cocaine epidemic, as it was considered then, I joined Anne on her NIH study looking at the effects of prenatal cocaine exposure on young children. So we enrolled about 500 high-risk mothers and brought their dyads into the University of Washington for a variety of assessments. As we continued, we began working with these women, we realized that some of the most important lessons we were learning were from the mothers themselves about their lives. They wanted more than anything else to be good mothers. I mean, every one of these women, that's what they wanted to do, is be good at this. But they were instead giving their babies the same kind of upbringing they had experienced as children, characterized by parental substance abuse and great family dysfunction. They simply didn't know any other way. They didn't have any kind of a template for what healthy parenting might be like. So for the study team, a more compelling new research direction emerged rather than continuing to do more follow-up studies to assess damage as the kids grew up. We decided that for us, prevention was the most important thing we could focus on, and that is how to connect in a meaningful way with this population in order to help them create healthy lives for themselves and their children and prevent future children from being born exposed. In 1991, we received funding from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration for a randomized controlled trial of this intensive home visiting case management intervention that we were developing, which was called Pcap, Parent-Child Assistance Program. So the public health aspect of all of this is that maternal alcohol and drug use puts mothers and children at risk for a variety of ways. First of all, there's the likelihood of harmful effects on a mother's health and well-being when she's using illegal, drugs of abuse or heavy alcohol or tobacco for that matter. Then there's the possible effects of prenatal exposure on the child's health and development. For example, fetal alcohol syndrome or fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. Alcohol is the only one of the drugs of abuse that are studied that's actually a teratogen, meaning at heavy levels, alcohol can be a permanent birth defect. Substance abuse impedes a mother's ability to care for her children and live healthy, functional lives. Within the context of a family setting, maternal substance abuse just doesn't work. And it puts the family at risk for negative outcomes, poverty, loss of custody, which is one of the most important things our mothers care about, and we'll talk about that more, and subsequent repeat pregnancies of alcohol and drug exposed pregnancies. So these problems are costly to families and individuals and communities, but they're preventable, and that's what is so compelling to us. So our solution is, as I said, we developed the Parent-Child Assistance Program in 1991, and the main aims of Pcap are to help mothers with substance use problems achieve and maintain recovery for themselves, build healthy family lives with their children, with custody of their children, and prevent any future children from being exposed to alcohol and drugs prenatally.
So to address these complex problems, Pcap rests heavily upon three primary theoretical foundations: relational theory, the Transtheoretical Model, and the principles of harm reduction. So first, relational theory is promulgated by Jean Baker Miller and Janet Surrey, among others, emphasizes the importance of relationships in women's lives. Healthy development is viewed as involving deepening capacity for and competence in interpersonal relationships. And other aspects of the self are understood to develop within this primary context. So in Pcap, case managers work to connect with their clients through outreach and develop trusting and positive relationships with clients for up to 3 years. And we actually often hear from clients that their case manager was the first person that they felt they could trust. Now, the Transtheoretical Model is most commonly known for the idea that when it comes to behavior change, at any given time, individuals are at different stages of readiness for change, and they don't necessarily move through the stages in a linear forward fashion. And the approaches used in working with people vary according to their stage of change, or at least they should vary. So in Pcap, case managers elicit clients' perspectives. They're trained in and use motivational interviewing techniques, and they help clients to evaluate choices and consequences, problem solve, and build self-efficacy. Harm reduction is often summarized by the basic notion that any steps toward decreased risk are steps in the right direction, and we believe that very strongly in Pcap. Now, harm reduction in reducing substance-exposed pregnancies, which is a key mission in Pcap, can be accomplished in 2 ways. You can either reduce substance use or increase family planning. Now, we do view abstinence as the ultimate harm reduction, but oftentimes clients are not willing or able to go there. Clients aren't asked to leave Pcap if they don't fully embrace abstinence or if they relapse or have setbacks in their recovery. And not being kicked out for relapse is a real hallmark of Pcap. And in the early years, some questioned whether Pcap was enabling women. And our position on that was that Pcap is enabling women to succeed by continuing to engage them and help them move towards healthy, substance-free lives. So Pcap case managers have a bachelor's degree and 2 to 4 years of social services experience. They receive extensive training at hire and then annual refresher trainings. They receive both individual and group supervision, which we call staffing, on a semi-monthly basis. The average caseloads of 16 families. And if you're familiar with case management programs, you'll know that those are very low caseloads that enable case managers to give a lot of personalized attention to their clients. And many case managers have lived experience. In fact, all of them do. We really value lived experience in Pcap. Not all of them are in substance use disorder recovery. Many of them are, but all of them have overcome some sort of adverse life experience. And that really enables them to serve as positive role models, offering clients hope and motivation from a realistic perspective. So this picture actually shows some actors from a promotional video that we had produced. But these are actual real Pcap staff of Washington State. In the before times, before COVID, staff used to gather annually in person by region for training. And since the pandemic, we've been doing that via Zoom. And we look forward to the days when we can all gather together again in person. I'll hand it back to Therese to talk more about what Pcap case managers do.
Okay, actually, I think this is
Oh, is that
your
for me?
slide. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll talk more about it myself. So what do they do? So case managers develop relationships with an array of community service providers like treatment providers, housing providers. They also develop relationships with the child welfare system, CPS workers. They meet with clients twice monthly, more or less, depending on client need, in clients' homes and communities for 3 years. We call Pcap a home visitation model, but being unhoused is not necessary for being in Pcap. We do work with unhoused clients. Having a home is not necessary to be in Pcap. We work with unhoused clients. Rarely, if ever, though, is a client seen in the Pcap office. Pcap is certainly not a desk job. Case managers will provide occasional transportation in support of clients' goals. For example, if a client needs to go to court for a child welfare hearing to try to get or maintain custody of her child and doesn't have a ride, certainly her case manager can give her a ride to that. Case managers will work to help connect clients with needed community services like housing, legal services, healthcare, family planning. They will help clients address barriers and follow through. They'll aid clients in setting their own goals and resetting goals when needed. They coach clients in taking steps to evaluate progress towards reaching their goals. And I want to build on this bit because some ambitious case managers will really want to get in there and do things for their clients. But we really want them to serve more as coaches. Like the players have to win the game, right? The coach can't get in there and win the game for them. At some point, Pcap needs to sort of step back and let clients sort of take control of their own lives. Case managers will also provide support to other family members, the father of the baby if he's in the picture, the grandma if she has temporary custody of the baby. And case managers also participate in rigorous evaluation and quality control. So here we have one of these annual gatherings. We brought staff together and asked them to talk a little bit about what the work meant to them. And so I want to play a couple of quotes here.
These women have all the makings of being successful with the right coaching and the right modeling and prompting. I personally have experienced moments with clients where you could just see the look on their face. They don't understand why somebody cares. These women.
Okay.
You could relapse tomorrow. I'm going to call you. I'm going to ask you okay? I'm going to ask you ready to get back up. As long as people know that you care and you're there, they will always be engaged in your program.
Okay, and now I'll hand it back to Therese.
Thanks, Susan. So obviously this work is difficult. I mean, based on what Susan has talked about, and it can be very, very challenging at times. We have women who disappear for months at a time. So tracing the women and continuing to do outreach in very creative ways is a really important part of keeping them in the program for 3 years. So yeah, not kicking them out, not only for relapse, but also if they just don't engage with you, it's like, we just need to be patient. She's going to learn soon enough that she can trust us and that she is going to create her own goals. And we're not trying to tell her how to live her life. We're trying to help her improve. So it's a real, I just feel really, really lucky that it's a 3-year program because it takes that long to engage women and get them started and let them fall down and pick themselves up and do better the next time. That's how any of us learn anything, right? It's by making mistakes and repeating. So we've got the we've got that length of time, which makes a really big difference. So case managers work with their clients to help them think about their lives. This really is designed to be client-centered and to help them make good decisions for themselves and their children. And this sounds good, but the extent to which they can do this depends on their cognitive capacity and their functional ability. So not all women are going to succeed in Pcap in the same way. Next slide. Functionality. In Pcap, we see that functionality can be compromised for a number of reasons. First of all the women who come into Pcap, part of the eligibility criteria is that they have to have used substance, alcohol or drugs heavily during pregnancy. So that compromises people from the get-go. Next, substance abuse and comorbidities are common. About 2/3 of the women in Pcap have in self-report a psychiatric diagnosis in addition to substance use. And Susan will describe this later. And it's typically mostly depression and anxiety, but so we've got this comorbidity to consider. The other thing is prenatal alcohol and drug exposure among the women themselves. Most of these women were born to parents who had a substance use problem, and a lot of their mothers did. About 20% of our moms in Pcap report that they know that their own mother was a very heavy drinker during the pregnancy with them. So when we look at that exposure and also some of the clinical expression of women's behavior, about 20% of the moms in Pcap may have fetal alcohol spectrum disorders themselves. And the other thing is history of traumatic brain injury. You know, once we started interviewing these people, it's like amazing the kinds of accidents and fights they've been in. So about 35% of clients in Pcap report that they've had a serious head injury at least once in their lifetimes. So these are all some of the ways that moms in Pcap can be compromised. Next, please. So Pcap managers, as Susan said, they get a lot of training at the beginning of the program and refresher trainings, and then other people come in and train. So we're not going to be able to tell you everything today, but in general, Pcap case managers are trained to adjust their expectations to the level that they think the mother is at. So we think of it as just, you know, think younger when you think the mom isn't getting it. And it's not a matter of dumbing down at all. It's a matter of paying close enough attention to be able to communicate effectively with somebody. So, you know, if a woman has a 4th grade education, or if she really is not very literate at all, or has some of these other issues that might compromise her neurocognitive ability, we think younger. We adjust things to more to a simpler language, repeat things, and I'll talk about some other things on other slides. We also recognize possible language issues. Most of our mothers have not had neurocognitive assessments, but the ones who have, it's really very interesting. Their expressive language abilities are usually at about age appropriate. You know, a 20-year-old woman talks like a 20-year-old, and our moms are often, you know, very talkative and outgoing. But their receptive language ability is often, you know, like an 8 or 9-year-old level. So that's the part that gets them into trouble when they're dealing with community providers or child welfare. What they're hearing from people is not what people think that they're delivering. You know, they're not understanding it at an age appropriate level, but it seems like they are because they are expressing themselves well. So we tailor intervention style to the client level. And we think this basic approach is applicable to many kinds of brain-based disorders. Okay. So just an example of how this works with abstract and difficult to understand language, I asked case managers to send me some of the typical child welfare contracts that their women have, you know, redacted with the names out of it. And it was pretty interesting to spread these all out on the table. These are contracts that I would have a hard time figuring out, like, what do they want me to do? You know, and when do I need to do it by? And I don't, you know, what do I do, you know, when I go home with my kid? So here's an example, like phrasing. We have concerns about your parenting skills. Okay, what does that mean to a woman? Next slide, please. And more concrete and understandable language that Pcap workers would use is to take the contract with the mom and say, okay, here's what it says. Let's set up a daily schedule for your child that includes when he eats, when he takes naps, when he goes to bed. Let's write this down together. What makes it hard for you to keep a schedule? Let's make a plan to fix that. And this could be all kinds of things, you know, like people come over in the middle of the night, or her boyfriend comes back, or anything. Let's make a plan to fix that. Who can you call to ask for help? Where should we put their numbers? In your phone? On a refrigerator? So this is, you know, just really, really practical things in the home. Other strategies that we use when clients have compromised cognitive functioning, we present information using multiple modes and concrete, tangible tools. We really love concrete tools. And the moms more recently really like their smartphones, like if we can program things into their phones, like reminders for them or that kind of thing, that's neat. Also durable checklists, laminated lists that we ask mom where they'd like to put them in their homes. It's really amazing how, colorful piece of paper in large font. It's like, here's the people who cannot come in my house. These people are not allowed, and putting that on the back of the front door. So they've got that reinforcement. It's like, okay, here's my, here's what I can do. Also checklists, like for mothers who've got custody of their school-age kids back, like things I need to do in the morning to get the kids ready for school. You unpack the backpack the night before, you make lunch, you check for the homework stuff, the clothing, all of those things. And it's really amazing just having some structure like that and that constant reminder every day where they can check it off really helps to get some regularity. It gets that reminder for them, and it really helps keep women on track. The other thing, just real quick, we've had a number of women, lots of women, be able to stay in their HUD housing or Section 8 housing because of these checklists. People come in and inspect the home, and our moms are not usually very great at housekeeping, and they'll get kicked out for that. But by having checklists, easy to read checklists in every room, and like with a photograph of what the room looks like in a cleaned up condition, has helped people stay in their housing for years. As long as we keep working with them to look at the checklist, do those things, and you'll be fine. The other point on here is always check for true understanding. And I can't emphasize this enough. So often, no matter who the women are working with in the community, and also their physicians, people will say, do you understand, what you're supposed to do or what this is about? And they always say, yeah, got it. Do you have any questions? No, don't have any questions. Nobody wants to appear to be stupid, right? So, and that's had some really terrible consequences. Like, gosh, we have a number of women who've had really dreadful consequences from family planning instructions that were not clear at all to the women. They wanted to, use birth control to not, have an unexpected pregnancy. And, just by simple instructions that were not clear and were not repeated, there were problems. Also, women who have nearly had their kids removed because they didn't understand the complex instructions for how to mix baby formula, the proportions and cleaning the bottles and all that. And kids start to lose weight, and it's the mother's not intentionally trying to starve the child, but it's a matter of checking for true understanding. If you teach baby formula, the next thing to do is say, let's do this together. Can you show me how you would do this? Or this next bullet, let's role play a situation. We do that a lot. And you can do that without demeaning a woman. It's to say, let's practice this, okay? And you run through it. It makes a world of difference. And then another thing that's been really important for us is to help the clients identify a trusted point person in addition to their case manager. As Susan said earlier, in Pcap, if we get to the end of the 3 years and the woman is not able to stand on her own 2 feet and manage her life, we have really failed. So the whole job of the case manager is constantly to help the woman learn how to navigate her own life and do things and feel confident at doing them. And the case manager isn't always there, and she won't be after the 3 years. So it's been really important to help her figure out who really is a safe, and decent and good person for her to rely on when she has questions or when she just needs somebody to talk to.
So evaluation is really important in Pcap, and it's built into the program in multiple ways. And we want to use it to assess program outcomes, of course, but it's also really important to gain insights to inform policy and practice. So the main ways that we do this is we have researchers administer the Addiction Severity Index at program intake and exit. But also we have case managers report on client status every 6 months. And then also case manager time spent with clients is recorded on a weekly basis, and we try to have them hold that to establish standards. For example, we find that kind of the ideal amount of time spent working with or on behalf of clients is 55%. Of course, paperwork and other things also takes, and transportation also takes a lot of time, and we recognize that. So who are the women in Pcap? Eligibility criteria are that women must be pregnant or up to 12 months postpartum, but we do allow up to 24 months postpartum if capacity allows. Clients must have engaged in at-risk alcohol or drug use during their current or most recent pregnancy, and they must be ineffectively connected to community services. In other words, there has to be something that they need our help with. So what do they actually look like? The numbers fluctuate slightly over the years, but they are largely similar. So in general, average age is around 28.5 years. Generally only 10% of our clients are married. They average less than 12 years of education, generally have between 2 and 3 children, but less than 1 living with them. Only about 60% of clients have custody of their most recent child. In terms of race, about 65% of our clients self-identify as white, and 15% identify as American Indian or Alaska Native, 10% Hispanic or Latinx, 8% Black or African American, very small number Asian Pacific Islander, and 19% identify as multiracial. You can identify as multiple things, and so these don't add up to 100% necessarily. So in their childhood, about almost 2/3 report that their mother had a substance use problem. And then looking at either parent, 90% report that either parent had a substance use problem. So when you think about their primary parental role models, they saw a lot of substance use growing up. Almost 2/3 report that they experienced physical or sexual abuse in their childhood, and over 1/3 report that they were themselves involved in the child welfare system. Looking at adverse childhood experiences, their ACEs score is generally around 5 to 6 out of 10. So our clients have generally seen a lot of adversity in their lives, in their childhood. In adulthood, over 70% self-report that they have a mental health diagnosis. Most of these report that they have depression and anxiety, but we also see a lot of reports of diagnoses of PTSD and bipolar disorder. About 3/4 report that they've been incarcerated as adults, and about the same amount report that they've ever been beaten by a sexual partner. About 85% report that the father of the child that brought them into Pcap has a history of problem drug use. And in terms of the most common drugs reported being used during the most recent pregnancy, currently that would be methamphetamine. About 3/4 of our mothers report using that, and about half of the mothers report using heroin during pregnancy, and half report using cannabis. So what do our outcomes look like? So among 1,783 Pcap graduates between 2015 and 2021, looking at illicit drug use, and by that I'm not including cannabis, since cannabis is now legal in our state, what we see is that 88% of women reported during the pregnancy that brought them into Pcap, they used illicit drugs. But at exit, in the 30 days prior to exit, their exit interview, only 18% reported illicit drug use. So huge drop there. And then kind of on the flip side, when they came into Pcap, only about 3% were using, whoops, let me move back here. Only about 3% were using a reliable contraceptive around the time they got pregnant with the pregnancy that brought them into Pcap. But at exit, 30 days, in the 30 days prior to their exit interview, 61% were using a reliable contraceptive. So a huge jump there. We're really excited about that. We also see big increases in the proportion of clients in permanent or stable housing, big decreases in receiving welfare, and converse increases in employment. Also at exit, we see in terms of substance use, 88% of clients by exit have either have completed SUD or substance use disorder treatment or are currently in progress with that. Really happy to see that. About 3/4 have achieved a period of abstinence at some point during the Pcap program of at least 6 months. We're really excited to see that because that just goes to show that if you can do it for 6 months or more, at least once, you know you can do it again. And then what we also find is that at exit, 70% of clients have the child that brought them into Pcap living with them. And so we take that to as evidence that Pcap helps them to maintain custody of their child. Oops. Okay, given you'll recall that one of the main goals of Pcap is to help decrease the likelihood that any future children are exposed to alcohol or drugs prenatally. And what we find is that during the Pcap program, almost 80% of clients do not have a subsequent pregnancy. And of those who do, more than half do not have a substance-exposed subsequent birth. Only 10% of clients have a substance-exposed subsequent birth during the program. And we're also very proud of that. Then I'll hand it back to Therese.
Okay, thank you. So we've written a lot about Pcap over the years. Susan, if you want to move the slide, thank you. So we've selected just a couple of studies I wanted to talk about because they seemed to me to be some of the most important in terms of practice and policy implications. So in 2013, we looked at, we characterized mothers in Pcap based on the custody of the child, the index child at exit, because as I've mentioned, that's what the moms really care about, like, can I keep my babies? So we looked at that, and this is a sample size of 458. So at the end of Pcap, we found that 59% of the mothers had children in their care. And Susan just pointed out our current stats are 70%. So this is improved. We're really happy about that. But so 35% had maintained custody of the kids of their index child throughout Pcap the whole time. And they were characterized by higher education levels, fewer psychiatric problems, and fewer children. So this made sense to us. It's like, yeah, these are all good. These are all reasons why they would keep custody. 24% of the mothers had lost custody during Pcap, but they regained. So they were able to do what was needed to do to get those kids back. 41% of the mothers at the end of Pcap did not have the child, the index child, in their care. 12% of them had never had the child even for a day of custody. And those were, you know, they were some pretty, you can see why, they were characterized by IV heroin use during pregnancy, which is, you know, that's pretty hardcore. Reported history of hallucinations, and one or more previous children had died. So, and then 29% of the women, and these are the ones we're really concerned about, had lost custody of the kids and were not able to regain custody during Pcap. So what did they look like? So comparing those who regained custody and those who were not able to do that, we saw that both Pcap groups, both of those groups had received similar amount of case manager time, similar high rates of inpatient treatment and outpatient substance abuse treatment. But the group that did not regain were more likely to have multiple psychiatric diagnoses and significantly more likely to have psychiatric disability. So mental health issues were the big thing that were keeping them from being able to parent. Few of them had their service needs met. A significantly smaller percent received ongoing psychiatric care, which was, tough for us to realize because a big part of our job is connecting people with services. But, like Susan mentioned before, we can only do so much, and then the client needs to actually avail herself, and follow through with those services. So our and the group that didn't regain was also less likely to have at least a year of clean time at exit. So the client's psychiatric disability may have limited their ability to access services without the case manager there constantly, to difficulty anticipating and resolving serious problems, and unable to utilize available community services. Like women who are seriously depressed do not get up and go to their appointment. So this was really interesting to us. So here were these women who lost custody and were not able to regain. So another thing that we looked at, this next paper in 2014, we looked at this phenomenon that I had heard from the beginning of Pcap. Women will say, I'm going to keep having babies until they let me keep one. And they literally use those words. So we wanted to look at that, like, is that really true? Is that what the pattern is when you take a baby away, they have a repeat exposed pregnancy? And that is exactly what we saw. Most of the women didn't have any subsequent birth in the 3 years of Pcap. 12% had an exposed birth and 10% had an unexposed birth, which were the same percentages that we currently see. But the odds of having a substance exposed subsequent birth were increased threefold if the previous baby had been removed from the mother's care. And that was significant if you look at the odds ratios. So exactly what the mothers say is what happens. And what was really neat about that paper, I thought, was the practice and policy implications for child welfare workers, which, we work really closely with child welfare, but it was like, the solution to these problem mothers is not to take the kids away. The solution is to help them rebuild their lives and get the services they need so they can be healthy and strong and raise healthy, strong kids. So this last paper, Hildebrand is a colleague of ours, 2020, we looked, this is a small study, 57 women. So we examined changes in social emotional functioning of Pcap moms and babies. So 24 mothers received regular Pcap along with a trauma-informed psychotherapeutic intervention, infant parent psychotherapy, that was delivered in the home by certified therapists. And 33 mothers received just regular Pcap as usual. The social emotional functioning was assessed pre and post 12 months later using the FEAS, Functional Emotional Assessment Scale. Next. So the dyads in both groups, we were pretty excited about this, improved comparably in overall social emotional functioning, including the moms who didn't get the special psychotherapy. It was just the Pcap services. The improved FEAS scores were predicted by the number of community services received, not by the amount of Pcap time, but it was the number of services received. The most common services received were ones that really make sense when you think about what does a mother need to stay stable and secure and raise, a peaceful, family. Permanent clean and sober housing, 84%. Ongoing alcohol and drug treatment, like outpatient treatment continuing, 3/4. Childcare was really, really important. And today there's just so much concern about childcare subsidies, and women can't get childcare paid for, but how do you go to treatment or get a job or go back to school and get your GED if you don't have decent childcare? Treatment or prescribed mental health medications was 70%, and clean and sober support systems for so people to hang out with and be your friends and do things with that are clean and sober and are not going to lead you into relapse. So the practice and policy implications. There's a lot, we write a lot in the discussions, but just in a nutshell, it's when a parent suffers with a substance use or mental health disorder, families really need help navigating multiple systems and coordinating care. It's incredibly difficult to even get appointments, like even at the UW, I hate to say that, but you wait on the phone forever, and then you're asked a lot of questions, and what about payment and all this other stuff. So navigating services is a really basic thing that we need to do for really high-risk families. And the relevant services have to be available, and they have to be of sufficient duration and intensity so that the family actually benefits and shows progress. So it's not enough to just hand somebody a phone number and say, good luck with that, or they have 2 appointments. It really has to be tailored, which seems to make sense, but it doesn't happen for women who live in poverty. It really doesn't. Next, please. So other lessons or policy and practice implications, our research demonstrates that connecting families with relevant services is essential to helping the moms establish a sense of safety and stability, peacefulness, like where you're going to sleep that night. You're not moving every night. There aren't 15 people living in the home with you. So this is what helps them build the foundation for having the time and the peace of mind to develop attachment and relationship for healthy social emotional functioning with their kids. Connecting with services helps promote staying in recovery. It helps maintain or regain child custody because you are providing the structure, the safety that families need, and then supporting mothers' growth and development in a host of ways, whether they're mental health treatment, going on to get further education or jobs. Thanks, Susan. So I want to, we do great exit interviews with women and get a lot of objective and also subjective information from them. This is my very favorite quote after all these years in Pcap from a client. Before Pcap, I never thought about goals. They showed me the right direction. They showed me that I am responsible, that no matter who I am or what I do, I am somebody. It is never too late.
Okay, so over the years under Teresa's leadership, Pcap has really grown and expanded. So from 1991 to 1995, Pcap was federally funded by SAMHSA to implement Pcap and fund a randomized controlled trial at UW. Then when funding ended, Pcap received interim philanthropic funding for the Seattle site. Then around the same time, the governor funded a replication in a Tacoma site. And then from 1997 forward, funding was picked up by the Division of Behavioral Health and Recovery, which is previously in the Department of Social and Health Services and now in the Healthcare Authority. And Pcap has been expanded across the state, and you can sort of see here how that has sort of played out over the years. We estimate that the reach of the 15 sites covers 19 plus counties now and more than 90% of the eligible population of Washington state. There have been replications and adaptations in multiple states, and internationally there are replication sites across Canada. Then there's even one in Western Australia. And coming soon this summer, actually, there will be 2 replication sites in Oklahoma, and I'm going to say more about that in a moment. So Therese, as Jürgen mentioned, retired as the director of Pcap in June of 2020, and she'll fully retire at the end of this month. And of course, we were all really excited for her, but also a little bit sad that we won't be seeing her as much. I have to say, I personally am tremendously grateful for her mentorship that she's so generously given me since I've become director of Pcap in July of 2020. Thank you so much, Therese. And I'm going to continue the ongoing NIH-funded fetal alcohol spectrum disorder research that Therese has spearheaded over many years at the Fetal Alcohol and Drug Unit. But one of the first things that Teresa and I worked on together after I became director of Pcap was looking at the data with a lens towards looking at racial and ethnic disparities in outcomes in Pcap. And you know, in the interest of time, I'm actually gonna just kind of actually skip over this because I want to save a little bit of time for questions at the end and just kind of encourage you to look for the paper when it comes out. Teresa?
Can I interrupt? Could you just show them the second slide that both of our hypotheses were?
Yeah, basically our hypotheses were supported. We did find evidence of racial disparities at baseline as we hypothesized. Native American women stood out as facing disproportionate challenges. But we also found, and we were excited to find as we hypothesized, that there were no racial differences in client outcomes among 2,285 women with exit data. However, we did want to check and just see if there were any racial differences in attrition. And we did find that American Indian and Alaska Natives were more likely to attrit compared to other groups, even when you controlled for other predictors of attrition. We're still doing data analysis to kind of unpack this finding. And we did include in the attrition group people who left Pcap for reasons such as moving away, going into long-term incarceration. So not necessarily that Pcap was, you know, unable to engage with them. Nonetheless, you know, we feel we have to do more to investigate the reasons and implement strategies to keep Native women engaged. In terms of future directions, as I mentioned, Pcap will be launching in Oklahoma this summer. While working as director of program evaluation at the Casey Family Programs here in Seattle some years ago, our colleague, Dr. Erin Mayer, did an evaluation of Pcap and was really impressed with the program. And so when she accepted a faculty position at the University of Oklahoma, she became committed to bring Pcap to Oklahoma, and she worked tirelessly to secure funding from a consortium of funders. So this is going to enable us to operate 2 sites and conduct a randomized controlled trial in Oklahoma. Now, you'll recall that there was an RCT of Pcap in Washington back in the 90s. But since then, since then, Pcap has really become a standard of care here. But in the meantime, Washington has codified definitions of evidence-based practice and research-based practice in law, and other states and the federal government are following suit. So we're really excited to have the opportunity to conduct a modern RCT that will meet the standards needed for Pcap to be eligible for additional funding under these new definitions, including the federal Family First Prevention Services Act. So in Oklahoma, we'll be enrolling 200 women and using random assignment to compare Pcap to services as usual. So we couldn't do this work without a lot of support. First and foremost, we're extremely grateful for the longstanding and generous funding of the Division of Behavioral Health and Recovery and the Washington Health Care Authority. The thousands of mothers who have participated, hundreds of case managers, clinical supervisors, and office assistants, our host agencies and community partners across Washington state, and numerous colleagues whose collaboration has been invaluable. I'd also like to give a special shout out to our former evaluator, Kara Ernst, who retired in January this year after 30 years of working with Pcap. I've included our email addresses here on this slide in case you want to reach out with questions or comments about our presentation. And I will stop there and we've got about 5 minutes left for questions.
Well, thank you, Dr. Grant and Dr. Stoner, for walking through this remarkable program, describing what happens, what the actual work is, evaluations of it, future directions, and much more. I think how interesting, motivating to hear about this in such detail. I want to encourage participants to write in with any questions, comments. There's a couple that have come in. I was just struck, I mean, I'm just thinking about this and how much the emphasis, the actual intervention is focusing on daily functioning, basic needs, maintaining that, getting to it if it's not there. It's very interesting. And I wonder, is that just me thinking about this for the first time? Was this intentional? Can you comment on that?
Well, I guess I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering if maybe as a physician, I might be more biased towards making treatment decisions. And this is so much of supporting functioning and with clear outcomes down the road. And it's kind of like maintaining that and focusing on that relentlessly. It sounds like for 3 years.
Well, and you know, I realize, you know, physicians don't have a lot of time, you know, like to check for true understanding. And what if the client doesn't have true understanding? You have to walk through that. I mean, there are really a lot of pressures in today's medical system and our social sciences, you know, social services too. So, but nevertheless, it doesn't do any good to send somebody out the door if you haven't made some attempt to find out whether they're going to follow through with this, you know, or who do you have to talk to? Or if you know a patient is compromised, ask them to bring somebody to the appointment with them next time, you know, and write things down. I mean, there are, I think, little things that people can do to just care, you know, about whether the message is getting received.
I appreciate that comment. One question came in related to trying to balance supporting mothers with current drug use and how case managers or others in Pcap might manage calling, making referrals to CPS. Is that something that comes up? Would you like to comment on that?
Sure, it does come up. I don't know, Susan, if you want.
We should say that we are mandated reporters, absolutely. And so certainly if case managers observed anything that would raise an issue about child safety, we would be mandated to report that.
Right. But in Washington state, it is not, I think there are only like 7 or 8 states that take kids away because a mother is drinking or using drugs. Like that is not a reason to, you know, conclude that she's harming her child. So case managers keep a very close eye on this. And the other thing we do is we encourage mothers with the case manager sitting there with her to call her child welfare worker and saying, you know what, I'm on a slippery slope. I'm having some trouble here. You know, your job is to help me with this. Here, you know, to kind of fess up, if you will, and ask for help rather than be caught later. You know, it's like, come on, you know, this is okay. You're not getting kicked out of anything because of relapsing, but you have to open up and be clear about it so we can help you.
It's kind of like, getting the individual to continue to do things and with that responsibility. I think that was illustrated in the quote that you showed, Dr. Grant. Yeah. Another question came in about related interventions that might minimize disruption and gains that are made with mothers and children when incarceration occurs. I guess that brings up a related question of to what extent Pcap might be involved if a mother is incarcerated. Maybe it's not feasible in that way, but are there other kind of interventions that go along in that circumstance?
Well, when mothers become incarcerated, they can stay in Pcap. If they go into long-term incarceration, we don't keep them in Pcap because we want to open up a slot for somebody else. But if they're going in temporarily, we stay engaged, like helping the grandma if she's got custody of the kids, or helping the client navigate whatever she has to do in prison, or helping her take her GED classes or go to treatment. A lot of treatment or prison facilities have services that are available, but mostly people don't know about it. So the case managers really try to help the moms not lose too much ground while she's in jail. So, and our moms go to jail, like Susan said, 75% of our mothers have been incarcerated, and it's an average of like 7 or 8 times. I mean, they're used to going in and out. Yeah.
Well, we've just got a minute or so left, and I believe Dr. Unitzer will be joining us for a final comment here. Jürgen, you'll need to unmute.
You are right. Well, just to restate what I said in the chat, this was an amazing presentation. Thanks to both of you, and thank you for all of the work. It's clearly hard. It's, I'm sure, often controversial, and that's what makes it worth taking on. So I just want to thank you both. I think this is giving us a lot of hope. It's showing us that there's a lot that we can do. And I still stick with my story that I told 30 years ago, because at that time, what I said is, you know, when a child spends 9 months in an environment with toxic substances and a lot of stress hormones, it's a very bad thing. And the child might come up with a brain that makes it very hard not to be a fussy baby. And now you have a stressed out mom and a fussy baby, and attachment doesn't go very well. And Bro Brundtland looked at me and she goes, "That sounds like a really nice story. Is there any data to back any of this up?" And back then there wasn't a lot of data, but now there is a lot of data. And you created the data that sort of says, and if you do something about it, you can make changes in this. So I think it's really important. It's really powerful. Thank you both.
Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. It was really an honor, and it was really fun to do it. Thank you.
Hear, hear. Yes, thank you so much.
Well, great. Thank you again to Dr. Grant and to Dr. Stoner. And we'll, this is, like I said in the beginning, the end of the Grand Round series for this academic year. Look for the schedule to come out starting in mid to late September for next year. And we'll end Grand Rounds there for today. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.